Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats.
Has it been 10 episodes already? My goodness, if you're listening to the sound of my voice, then you must be in the seats with once again. As always, I am your host, Dave Voigt, the editor and publisher over at intheseats.ca, the source for all your best news and reviews from the world of cinema and beyond. And I am your host for this lovely podcast, which you can obviously find on Apple Music, Spotify, or you can find in our archives on our YouTube channel, In the Seats. Please subscribe and give a like where you can. Now, obviously, this is our 10th episode already, hard to believe. But for today's episode, what we did was we talked with a friend of the site, a friend of the show, Mr. Eric Marchen, a man who not only hosts his own TV show, but not one, not two, but 3 podcasts. He is, I dare say he is the hardest working man in show business, and he is a fellow critic. And what we did was we had a bit of a therapy session almost. We talked a lot about sort of the pivots that we've all had to make during COVID from an industry standpoint, how the business has changed, is changing, will change. Talked about the festival experience, talked about sort of not only the importance of our jobs, but that sounds pompous, but it's also about the impermanence of the job too. It's more about championing film. I got tongue-tied there, but which is why we all do this, what we do, because we love it so. But I hope you guys enjoy this deep dive into the industry, because I know I did. Thank you for the time. I've been on your show several times. It only feels fitting that I have you on mine.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And there's no time limit. So, I just like having a, organic conversation like Matt and I, when we always do the podcast. It's just like, okay, we'll end it when it naturally ends. And we usually end up going for like 2+ hours. I know we probably won't do that, but don't be afraid to like cut it off based on like thinking, oh, well, I have something to do. It's like, it's all good.
Notice the subtle product drop for his not 1, not 2, but 3 podcasts: the Untitled Movie podcast, the Untitled Movie Review podcast, and the Untitled Movie Conversations.
Yes.
Okay.
But we're creating an empire.
That voice you hear is Mr. Eric Marchen, obviously the host of those 3 podcasts and Cinema Scene on Rogers Television. And he is our lovely and gregarious guest today because I felt like this was a topic that needed to be talked about, and I needed like a colleague to talk about it with, because especially in these days of approaching 7 months of various degrees of lockdown, where there's kind of been theaters, but there haven't been theaters, and release schedules have been all over the map, and who knows what's opening when and where. Our business has been forced to pivot. I don't want to say dramatically, but it's definitely been a bit more alive in terms of what's actually going on from week to week. Jump in if you feel like I'm saying something wrong here, but it's been one of those things where, as much as everyone's bemoaning the lack of theatrical content, I don't think we've ever been busier at the same time.
Yeah, I would agree with you. I mean, I think this episode of your show is going to be as much of a therapy session as it is, sort of a reflection on the last 7 months or so. Because, when the pandemic was starting and things were shutting down and movie theaters were closing, and, the inevitable future was, a lot of the theatrical releases were pending or being delayed, or, things were kind of changing to mostly VOD or migrating over to streaming and VOD. For the first month or so, I was thinking, okay, we're going to be getting, less work to do. And, we'll get the odd thing here and there from, Netflix or, Crave or something like that. But, like as any company or any studio does, it's, they've adapted to the situation. And I feel that we've been getting even more content than we normally do in a calendar year, because of the pandemic, and because it's opened up an avenue to the possibility of streaming, smaller films, much smaller movies, and sort of, quote unquote mainstream films for streaming services and what have you. So it's been a fascinating sort of ride, and sort of how the industry is changing, especially with theaters being closed, and how you have a company like Disney, for example, deciding to release Mulan on Disney Plus for a premium price. And the decision that when it was announced, it was almost 3 weeks later when the film was available to stream. So it's such a quick turnaround as well.
No, for sure. I mean,
I apologize, by the way, for the dogs, just in case anybody's listening.
No problem at all, my friend. And I mean, it really has democratized sort of the movie release system. And I mean, can you walk me through just sort of that moment? Sort of, because I mean, you're not like me, you're not producing a podcast from home, you're not monitoring a website from home, you're going into a studio, you're shooting television. Can you walk me through sort of that moment where you decided that, and you and the producers behind the show obviously decided that, okay, we've got to start pivoting?
Yeah. It's one of those things where I haven't been in the Rogers studio since March. So the last time I shot an episode of Cinema Scene was with the Bay Street Video guys.
Yeah.
And then after that, I literally got an email in April saying, okay, we're closing the studio, we still want to do the show, let's set up Zoom conferences and what have you to record the episode, and then you can basically set up your own little sort of makeshift studio at home to record Cinema Scene and Review, which is just kind of a compilation show. So I mean, I've again, like the studios, the show has adapted to this kind of new format, and the first couple of episodes were a little bit strenuous and stressful, just in terms of, again, kind of figuring out the new sort of mode of how to kind of get through an episode. And they take a little longer because each segment is sort of recorded, and then we have to actually do more playback than we have before. But again, like, you get into a rhythm, and once you find that routine, you kind of you get used to it. It's just change. I think change is the thing that kind of throws off a lot of people. And like, that's one thing where it's like, when it's change that is sort of fast and quick in terms of how it sort of presents itself, I think that's the thing that can kind of throw someone like myself off, where I'm not used to sort of, rolling with the punches as quickly as possible. But again, you figure it out as you go along, and you have to keep telling yourself in the back of your mind, like, don't look for perfection. Don't look for something that is going to be 100%. I think it has to be progressive and not perfection. And that's the kind of, mentality I've been having in my head, where it's like, I'm doing the best I can given the circumstances. I'm lucky to still be doing this, remotely at home. I'm very lucky, to have a job that I love. So it's one of those things where, given the situation, it could be a lot worse. And that's what I always kind of think in the back of my head, even when I am stressed out. And don't get me wrong, I do stress out each and every week when I'm doing my voiceover recordings for my reviews on Rogers, or I'm setting up for a show, not necessarily with someone like you, because you've done it so many times with me, where I'm so comfortable with you. It's just basically, we have such a great shorthand. But when I have somebody on that is a first time guest, and it can be awkward just in general, right? Having somebody, physically in a room and having a conversation, for the cameras, it's not organic in any way whatsoever. So you take that even further by removing, the physical presence, and having somebody on a computer and having a conversation. It takes even more time to kind of, warm up and sort of figure out each other's kind of rhythms. And I think that's another thing as well to kind of take in mind, is that, again, it's not perfect, but again, with technology being what it is, it opens up new avenues. And I think that it's been kind of an interesting 7 months in that regard.
Yeah. And I was on one of the stress-inducing shows, so I know it wasn't.
Oh yeah.
It was definitely early days. But I mean, I love how you mention rhythms, because especially for people on the outside looking in, they may not necessarily uh, understand uh, the rhythms of the business, sort of the ebbs and flows and the waves of the release schedule. That's we're used to sort of us hitting us pretty consistently, and now these days it's democratized everything almost in a way, don't you find? Because all it's hard to sort of track our schedules almost any more than like 2 weeks in advance.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, it's one of those things where it almost feels like, I think in general we kind of live as film critics when it comes to our calendar. Our monthly calendar is a week by week basis, but I think it's been even more so since the pandemic, where you have some streaming services, again, such as Netflix, where they announce their stuff a couple 2 to 3 weeks before the release. So like some stuff will be up in the air
Or 2 to 3
until.
days sometimes, depending on what it is.
Yeah, exactly. And just in general now, where it's like, you know, even the people that are working, PR aren't completely sure when a movie is going to be released. And you sort of have to be more dogged, I find, to kind of like not harass anybody, but just, send emails kind of more frequently to ask if this movie is coming out, or is there a screener link available yet for this particular film, or an interview that I can schedule for this particular filmmaker, or actor, or writer, or somebody within the industry. So it's become sort of a situation where it's almost like I'm now living my life in terms of like work life, film related life, week by week, day by day. And anything that kind of happens within the 24-hour news cycle that kind of affects what we do as film critics, whether it be writing reviews, recording reviews, or some sort of form of communicating our thoughts and opinions on a movie. It's always changing. I mean, for example, like, last week it was announced that the Robert Zemeckis movie, The Witches, is going to be streaming in the US on HBO Max, but it's still getting a theatrical release here. But that also could change because we're in the midst of a second wave of, COVID-19. So, like something like The Witches could end up just being released on, Crave, or some related streaming site in Warner Brothers Canada. So it's one of those things where, again, like, it's just a fascinating time for us as film critics. And again, like, it's also kind of testing us in that, do we go to a press screening like in the summer with something like Tenet? Do you feel safe enough to do so? Or like, or New Mutants? I mean, to be honest, I, as much as I love movies and I live and breathe them, I don't think it is worth the risk, no matter how badly you want to see a new movie, or a film directed by Christopher Nolan. It's just one of those things where I think that, like, I personally don't think I'll feel 100% comfortable until a vaccine starts to circulate. And that's just how I feel personally. But again, I think you just need to do the work and the research and know what's going on, in your region, in your city, in your community. And if you feel safe enough, that's fine. But if you don't, that's okay as well. Don't
For
feel
sure.
pressured by, like, oh, I need to do this because this movie has gotten rave reviews. Like a film that I really loved that's playing theatrically right now is Sean Durkin's The Nest.
Oh,
And I think
absolutely.
it's one
Yeah.
of those films that is a beautiful looking movie and probably would lend itself to the big screen experience, but I would not recommend going to see it theatrically at the moment. I would wait for streaming, like any movie right now.
No, absolutely. I mean, you do have to. So it's important that people make sort of informed, not only informed decisions, but decisions that they feel comfortable with in terms of going to the movies. Like you said, I've only been once. I've been for Tenet, but again, it wasn't. It wasn't an optimal situation. I mean, again, but also it was as about as optimal it was going to get with the press screenings we have, people we know, very well spaced out. We were all wearing our masks. It's not something you're going to get on a general public screening necessarily, for sure. And I mean, I love just the fact that and I mean, I'm trying to figure out a way to word this because movies are still being released, but they aren't necessarily the high octane movies, and there's still a lot of interesting content being put out there. I mean, especially with something like On the Rocks, which hit theatrical, and also The Trial of Chicago 7, which is getting a limited theatrical up here. Because,
which is crazy because Cineplex has sort of this, opposition against Netflix. And I mean, even during the Toronto Film Festival, and we should probably even talk about that when, at some point, but usually during TIFF, for people that haven't attended the festival or haven't gone to press and industry screenings, Netflix related releases do not play at the Scotiabank Theater, where a lot of P&I screenings take place. They are usually
about 90% of them, to be honest.
Yeah, they're designated to the Lightbox or somewhere that isn't affiliated with Cineplex. So for Cineplex to now be playing, the 40-year-old version and the Trial of the Chicago 7 in their cinemas because they have a lack of content, because everybody thought that, with the release of Tenet, that was going to bring, the blockbuster, the bigger films back to the theaters again. And obviously it didn't. So now they have this, need to find content. So this partnership is just so bizarre because you would never think it would have happened otherwise.
No, but I mean, again, it has happened, and it does speak to sort of the trying times that exhibitors are having right now. And I mean, again, I think that goes back to something you said earlier, because, on the outside looking in from our jobs, it's like, oh, you guys get to go to movies and talk about them on TV and write about them. But I would say a good 3/4 of our job is sending emails, chasing publicists, booking interviews, especially when you're producing your own content and you don't have someone doing that for you and just assigning you a movie and going, okay, here, go watch this and write about it.
Yeah.
So much more of our job as content producers is chasing the content. And when the content becomes so much more democratized these days, it makes it that much more challenging.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, it's a situation where, you have to be a little bit more thick-skinned, and also, you have to accept no. Like the when somebody says, we don't feel, we want to give you a screener for so and so purposes, never take anything personally, and never feel like, the one thing I do not want to ever feel is entitled. Like, that's the thing where, like, in this industry, I've been very lucky to be where I am and what I'm doing, but I don't want to have this obligation or feeling that I'm like, okay, well, I deserve this screener because, I'm part of this group or that group or what have you. It's one of those situations where you have to realize, okay, some people, based on their outlets, will get certain things before other people, and that's just the way it is. And there is a certain hierarchy to the system, if you will. But you know what, again, like, it does trickle down, and there's so much content right now available that I don't think anybody is hurting to cover something. There is stuff available in every sort of facet. It might not just be kind of the bigger premium VOD releases. There's a lot of stuff that, like, Kino Lorber is releasing, and companies like that. And there's a lot of great stuff that's being released. I mean, I think still one of the best films of this year, and it played at TIFF last year, was Bacurau. And a film like that is a movie that could use as much critical push as possible to get eyes on it. And the more people that cover a film like that, the better chance somebody will be like, oh yeah, I saw that because my favorite movie website reviewed it, and maybe they don't normally do because it's the times of what they are. But like, a film like that deserves the additional praise and coverage that it probably wouldn't get in a regular year, or the quote unquote before times. So like, that's the kind of thing as well. But that's also really interesting, because I look at like your site covers so much, and you have so many writers, and I don't know how you keep track of it all. But
some days I don't.
like Yeah, but then you look at your site and then you look at another site and you're kind of like, okay, well, they're also covering some of the stuff that you are, but then they might be covering something different as well, right? So like it's kind of interesting to see sort of the differences in what is being covered that are opening in the same week or the same month, and I find that that's also really fascinating now, is that not one, two things are the same.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because, I mean, especially for our business, I mean, and I mean, I found this to be true maybe 2, 3 years ago. There was a period of time where we were all doing the same thing and we were all producing the same content. And I was getting really sort of like borderline jaded with it and a little disillusioned because, like, I knew the other stuff was out there, but it wasn't a question of like we weren't like people weren't chasing it nearly as much as they are now.
Right. Well, it's like doing roundtables as well, right? It's almost kind of like, well, why do you even bother doing it? Because, everybody's covering the same round table that you're at, and you're just going to get a transcribed version from the studio afterwards instead of doing a one-on-one. And again, I don't want to say that like, oh, I should be getting a one-on-one versus doing a round table. But if you're offered the round table and you look at it afterwards, it's like, well, I could just take what's sent to me afterwards and just have that as the coverage. I don't need to necessarily even be a part of it because you're going to get the same you're lucky to get maybe one or two questions because you're sat with a group of people that are also covering the film, 5 or 6 other journalists, and it's basically, it can either be a free for all, or if it's more organized, you get that one or two questions in, and when you look back at it, it's like, okay, well, was that really worth it? And like, is that bringing my perspective to this interview or this story? And it's really not. So now it's even more fascinating because of the the variety that's available, and not one person is covering necessarily the same thing. And it's a lot like what TIFF was, where like you could go to TIFF and there's 300 odd movies in a festival like that, and person A and person B can go to the same festival, and at the end of the festival they don't see the same exact movies. Like that's the kind of thing that I'm finding now with the world that we live in. There's a lot of opportunity to cover stuff that isn't just the same thing, and you're not just getting a regurgitation of the same movie review over and over again. You are still getting some of the bigger films that are going to be covered.
Be overlap.
Yeah, there's always overlap, but now you're getting overlap, but it's digging into the dirt and sort of finding that nugget, if you will, that truffle that's at the bottom, and sort of being like, oh, this is something that like I would really like to share with my readership or my viewers, and say like, hey, this movie is also opening the same week or streaming the same week that this is. And something like another movie that I think is an amazing film is Dick Johnson Is Dead, Kirsten Johnson's movie. If you haven't seen Camera Person, an amazing film as well. Story about her father who is slowly succumbing to dementia. That's a movie that was just recently released on Netflix, but it's not kind of upfront with sort of its advertising for that film. So like when you go on to Netflix and you're scrolling through like new releases and what's coming soon and things like that, it's not in sort of the the top 5 or 6 films. You have to really dig for it. So I think when you're supporting something like that and you really do love a movie like that, I think that's what makes a world of difference, because a film like that, even though it has a major streaming distributor behind it, still can get lost in the shuffle.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I mean, I love how you just mentioned sort of finding those diamonds in the rough and those little nuggets, because I mean, as much as we are busy and busier, and like you say, the before times, there was a schedule, we had screenings to attend, there were things, there wasn't a lot of necessarily free time for other stuff. Now that we're all working from home and obviously still working, but I would say that the schedules are maybe a little more flexible. There's a bit more of an avenue to turn on a Criterion channel, to really dive into something like Crave with some of the great HBO and Showtime documentaries. And I'm kind of curious, is there anything that you've gotten to go, wow, This is really good.
Well, yeah, I mean, I mentioned Dick Johnson is dead, but it's one of those things where this is all inside baseball. So right now, so for people that are listening, it's like, what are these guys even talking about? So right now, so I'm a part of a critics group called the Critics Choice Awards, and they have a documentary branch. So I've been kind of watching a lot of documentaries, and I'm a part of an awards selection of that group. And so a movie that I really loved that's coming out on Amazon Prime at the end of the month. I believe it's the 23rd here in Canada. It might be earlier in the US. Is a movie called Time, which is a really powerful documentary about the prison industrial complex, but told in a kind of microcosm about a husband and wife who, were in a desperate situation and tried to rob a bank, one of which is given a lighter sentence. The husband is given, a life sentence, and you see, this woman try to get her husband out of prison and the roadblocks she faces. She's also raising, a family, and the odds are always stacked against her, but she continues to fight the system. And the movie uses a lot of archival footage that's all in black and white. It's not very long. It's less than an hour and a half, but it gets to the point in telling you the story it needs to, both on a political scale, but also on an emotional one. And I think that the movie and the filmmaker, Garrett Bradley, who's the director, she never kind of apologizes for the fact or she never hides the fact that what this person did was wrong. But at the same time, it's like, this person is trying to make a better life for herself, and kind of, show that what her husband was sentenced with is not what he really deserved. It's very similar to, like, the war on drugs, where, somebody that was arrested or charged with, possession of marijuana in the 80s would have gotten like this trumped up charge of, 25 years to life, which is ridiculous. So the film is, I think, a very powerful and moving portrait of a family trying to keep it together over the course of 20 odd years. But on top of that, it's just, an interesting sort of look at sort of what America values and sort of what they don't. And, it focuses on race and sort of, the idea that, the prison system and economy is more valued than people. So that is a movie that I was kind of blown away by more recently, that I would highly recommend people check out when it's available on Amazon Prime in Canada, which is one of those little movies that I think could get lost in the shuffle. But I think a lot of critics will come to its to its aid to champion it. And it was a film that played at Sundance, and I think it played at New York as well. So
how important do you think it is these days to just, because, I mean, obviously in this business, we all come to it as fans first. And I mean, this is a line I use a lot, but we're all film fans before we start working in various degrees of the film industry. And as much as sort of the bigger tentpole movies will draw traffic and will draw ratings, is because it's what people generally do want to see, there still has to be sort of an avenue for the little stuff. And at least from my perspective, I almost feel a little more weight on my shoulders these days, especially in sort of the COVID times, to sort of champion that smaller stuff when there's something that really stands out, especially with people sort of on the surface going, there's no content, there's nothing to watch. It's like, but no, there really is. You just have to.
There's in every given week, there's always something. Like, if somebody says there isn't anything, they're lying, or they're just not looking for it. But that's like the same thing with, like, at the end of the year when people are doing their, their best of lists, and they're like, oh, there wasn't, 10 good movies in so and so year. Well, it's like, well, no, that's a bunch of BS. Sorry. Like, you're just not doing the work, and you're just kind of like, playing up a hyperbolic kind of reaction. And like, you just need to look. You just need to do the work, and you don't have to do a lot of work. You just have to, whether it's you're following a certain website or, looking online, like there's always content available each and every week. Nothing has dried up since the pandemic kind of shut everything down, theatrically speaking. Like we've gotten, I think, more work in the last 7 months than we have in any other time of the year. And that doesn't even include TIFF, which I think we should also talk a little bit about, because I mean that was such a fascinating experience to have as a film critic, sort of watching movies at home and not having that interactive experience where once in every calendar year in the fall, the beginning of September, you see people that you don't usually see any other time of the year. You see movies that are kind of the discoveries or the bigger films, but it's kind of this interesting mix of the two. And to have it, basically the majority of it, be a digital kind of release strategy, which I think ultimately worked. Like I didn't have many problems on my end with the digital platform that they were using, but it was just so fascinating that TIFF kind of played, and understandably so, in a different kind of fashion this year because of what is going on. But again, I think the more curated style made it more not only accessible, but I think everybody was able to kind of have an experience like you would at Cannes or something like that, where everybody sees the same film and everybody can have a conversation about so and so movie on this day, because those 5 or 6 films were the ones that were released digitally that morning, and they have 48 hours to watch them.
No, and I mean, just to give a little context for people who don't know, I mean, in the sort of, given the circumstances of the pandemic, most film festivals across the globe have either gone 100% digital, canceled, or created some sort of hybrid of the two. And I mean, historically, for something like the Toronto International Film Festival, for our jobs, it was 12, 14, 16-hour days, running from screenings to junkets to screenings to junkets. We loved it.
Getting 3 hours of sleep, we should mention.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, because in those other 3 hours, you're writing up what you saw that day, and
your diet just goes out the window. Oh, yeah. You're eating trash all the time. Like the
caffeine content is through the roof for sure.
It's the worst and best experience. It's the time of year where I think I feel the most alive, but then by the end of it, I'm kind of like dead. I'm glad it's only 2 weeks. But technically it's longer for us usually as well, because we start in August. Again, this is outside of,
more inside baseball
specifically. Yeah. Press screenings for Toronto press usually begin in August. So mid-August is when we start seeing stuff that is going to play at TIFF. This year was much different in terms of how, screening schedules worked, even for press related materials.
Like we weren't, as much as there were some in-person screenings at TIFF this year, people should understand and know we weren't there. Like press, we're not there at all, unless they bought a ticket. They were not there, period. And it really made for an interesting dynamic. I mean, I made a joke with someone like, I could roll out of bed, I could do a junket interview, and then I could roll back into bed. It was literally that kind of experience, which it takes a minute to get used to. It's not a hard thing. I'm not complaining, but it's definitely a different gear shift from the way the job used to be.
Yeah, and I also do find myself procrastinating a little bit more in these days, where like I still have a routine or a schedule that I try to stick to, because usually Thursday mornings is when I have to have my deadline for my voiceovers. So that kind of keeps me grounded for the week. And so, okay, so I need to watch this movie or this movie by this time, write a review for then, and then, produce this content. Or if, I'm shooting an episode or what have you, those are important. But I also find myself like, okay, it's Monday. I have the whole week ahead of me. I have plenty of time to do this. I don't have to worry about it right now. I'm going to live forever. That kind of mentality. And then, Tuesday afternoon gets around. I'm like, shit, I haven't even watched anything yet. And I have 3 to 4 films that I need to review this week. And I don't want to cram them all in, because I want to give each movie a little bit of time to breathe and to reflect on it, and to really kind of contemplate it. And TIFF isn't like that, obviously, but with a regular working schedule, you have to give the filmmakers that respect, even if the movie isn't good, to allow some time for the film to kind of digest or simmer. And I understand, some people are busier than others, and especially, someone like you who has, like 12 people working on your site, and like
not quite that many, but yeah.
Right. I am exaggerating, but like, you're doing so much with so little, and you have to, meet certain deadlines. So like, I understand the stress of like, okay, you can get to it when you have to, and that's, what it is. But like I have found myself in the last, 6-7 months kind of being a little bit more lax than I normally would be, in terms of, again, because I haven't gone outside much either, like other than, to walk the dogs, or like, have to pick something up that is, grocery store related. Like, I haven't really done anything that, I went to Tenet, but I went to Tenet in Durham. I didn't go to the press screening in Toronto. So like, it's just been one of those things where I just haven't been, going outside unless I have to, for the most part.
No, and I mean, it's again, like, the rhythms are weird, the scheduling is weird, and I mean, as much as we bemoan it, I mean, not necessarily complain, but just, commenting on the change. I mean, I do sympathize a little bit with a lot of our PR friends, our publicist friends who are working from home as well, and having to deal with the same schedules and the same ideas. And this applies not just for our industry, really, but for industries across the board. I mean, we can work from home thanks to technology, and most of us are still, or at least a lot of us anyway, are maintaining a certain level of productivity and earning money and doing what we have to do. But it's a different schedule when you've got the dog nipping at your ankles, wanting to go out, or there's a package at the door or something. It definitely sort of, it's something different to get used to.
Yeah, there are more distractions, and
Yes,
there are more opportunities to kind of, drift off into a daydream, or kind of, have something else preoccupy your time. And that's also a challenge. And I mean, like, again, like, it also depends on how you're watching the movies as well. Like, if you're sitting at home and watching them on a laptop, and you have your phone on, and the dog's barking, or as you mentioned, you get a package or something like that, there's so many distractions, where when you're in a press screening, or just watching a movie in a theater, for the most part, those distractions go out the door, because you're kind of, completely, you know giving yourself over to that film for, the 2 hours or hour, however long. And unless you have to take a call and go outside, or take a bathroom break, which I don't. Some people do, and that's fine. But there's not much room for distraction. Where now there is so much opportunity for, anything to kind of take you away from what you're focused on. And that can be a problem, as much as it is, nice to spend more time at home, or not have to necessarily commute to Toronto, or to a business, or feel stressed, or have the anxiety of, having to work somewhere. So I really appreciate the people that are, on the front lines, or having to work, in the office. Like, we have a couple people at Rogers that have to be there, because they're technicians and they're producers. And I think about them and their health and safety. And I always say, like, let like just keep me posted on what's going on. But like, every time, or every week, I get a call from my producer Doug, and he's like, okay, let's set up for the next episode, and we keep going. And so that's like, again, I consider myself really lucky, because a lot of people aren't in that situation, and a lot of people have been laid off or let go because of the pandemic. And so you have to kind of look at it, in two ways. It's a double-edged sword. Like, you're really lucky if you are working, and at the same time, it's more distracting when you're at home as well, remotely speaking.
No, and I mean, just to sort of steer it back, I mean, I think we've just distilled sort of what we love about the cinematic experience. It's not just the big screen, sort of the effects, the experience, but it's that moment of peace where we get lost in something else. And it's a lot hard, like as much as we'll watch stuff at home and enjoy stuff at home, it's a lot harder to have that sort of moment of serenity where you get lost in it.
Yeah, it's the closest thing I can think of that comes to a second to me, but it you have to do this when you're driving is the closest thing that I could compare it to, because when you're driving, everything else doesn't matter. The
Yeah,
only thing that matters is
for
the
sure.
road and the rules of the road, and what is going on in front of you, behind you. Everything else in your day-to-day life should not be a distraction. Phones, the people around you, even though if you can still have a conversation or listen to the radio and things like that, you have to kind of maintain a focus on what's ahead of you. And when you're in a theater and you're watching a movie, you're maintaining a focus of what's in front of you, what is being projected onto you, and what the movie is saying, and the experience of that film. And there aren't as many distractors or interruptions that can really change that, unless the theater has a blackout, or students or somebody walk into the movie theater before, because a lot of our press screenings usually take place at like 10 a.m. in the morning, so sometimes you'll get like a group of people walking into the theater. I remember for Boyhood, which was a
I
nearly
remember.
3-hour film, and one of my favorite movie going experiences, one of the best films of the last decade, and I was completely enraptured by it and watching it. And we're about like maybe 2/3 of the way in, and this class of kids, I think, came into the aisle, and for a good like 2 to 3 minutes, they were talking and just staying there, and standing there. And I was just thinking to myself, it's like, I'm not watching the movie anymore. I'm thinking about like these kids all standing there. Like I want to be back on the film. So you can't help with those kind of things.
For
But
sure.
for the most part, like, you are kind of giving yourself over to the theatrical experience when you're in the theater. And I do miss it. I really do love, that experience. Like, I think something like, Chloe Zhao's Nomadland would have been an amazing, experience to watch at the Elgin Theater, or the
Sure.
Princess of Wales, or, at the Lightbox, whether it be at a 10 a.m. screening or an evening screening. But at the same time, I'm just still happy I had a chance to see, what I think is one of the best films of the year. And the same thing with David Byrne's American Utopia. Like, that would have been an amazing experience to, feed off of the audience, or something at Midnight Madness, right? Like,
Yeah.
where like you have that communal experience, and now that's gone. So, you have to kind of substitute that with, you know, just kind of enjoying the film and your own company, and sort of thinking like, okay, this might be the way it plays if I were in a theater with a bunch of people, because I could only imagine, a bunch of Talking Heads fans kind of just completely, just dancing along, or singing, or just kind of in tune with what was on the screen. And that would have been something that probably would have added even more to the experience overall. But I still love that film. So, it's one of those things where we are feeling that loss, so to speak, not just in that, studio films like, the next Bond movie has been delayed, and like, oh, it's a shame that this movie now is not going to come out until 2021 at the earliest. So that's another conversation to even have as well. It's like, what is the future of the theatrical experience? Because a lot of these theater chains are, even before the pandemic, were facing a questionable future, whether it be bankruptcy or needing to partner up with other studios or companies. And now it's even more so a problem. So, like, what are we going to return back to when we eventually do get back to whatever, quote unquote normal is?
Yeah, and I mean, I'm glad you brought that up, because I mean, we're going to lose screens. How many?
Yeah.
Who knows? Will some be repurposed? But I mean, I think this whole health crisis really has brought in to highlight that sort of the day of the 16, 20, 24, 28 screen multiplex is more or less dead at this stage. There's going to be a lot of shrinkage. There's going to be a lot of downscaling. There's going to be a lot of repurposing. There may be some new smaller venues open. It really all depends on how the dust settles from it all. And I mean, this kind of dovetails into something else I wanted to ask you, because as much as our job is sort of being in the moment and appreciating those moments and sort of writing about things we see on screen, be they big or small, another part of our job is sort of anticipating the moments coming up.
Right.
Like, well, what about the Oscars? Or what about this? What do you think is going to happen at the end of the year? What's your best film of the year going to be? And it's like, a lot of times I find myself going, I don't know. Like, I'm legitimately trying to just sort of find myself personally sort of taking the content in as it comes rather than trying to prognosticate with what's to come like we used to do.
Yeah, and especially when it comes to, you know, voting for things or having to consider them, because now, you know, again, this is all kind of getting into the weeds of it, if you will.
Baseball, yeah.
Yeah, you know, with the Oscars kind of delaying their submission deadline to mid-February, it's like, so is 2020 extended to, you know, 2021 to February 2021? Like, can I put movies on, you know, my best of 2020 list that are, you know, in the first 2 months of 2021? Like, is that, you know, and what are those months going to look like? Are we going to be back to the theatrical experience by then? I personally don't think so. So what is going to happen with those last couple of months when the studios are like, you know, we're not going to release anything, you know, theatrically, so do we just, you know, pull the trigger and decide, okay, now we're going to release a bunch of stuff that we were saving up for and in hopes for a theatrical release, and just release it on VOD or sell it off to a Netflix or, you know, an HBO Max or something like that. So I think, like, in the next couple of months, it's going to be really fascinating to watch what happens, because again, like Netflix, you know, they have a lot of content that comes out each and every week, and sometimes, you know, they don't announce their release dates until, you know, almost the release of the film. Like something like David Fincher's Mank, which doesn't have a release date yet, I'm sure will probably be November, December. But at the same time, at least they kind of give you a heads up once the trailer drops, right? Where I think when we get to at least the beginning of December, there's going to be this moment of kind of either hesitation or doubt in the studio's mindset, because theaters haven't opened and a lot of them have remained closed. And it's like, well, we want this movie to be eligible for awards consideration this year, so we got to release it. So what do we do? You know, what are we going to do with this thing? And even something like the Trial of the Chicago 7, you know, that was a Paramount movie, and Paramount decided earlier on this year, because of COVID, because of what was going on, that they just couldn't release the film. So they gave it, they you know, sold it to Netflix. And the same thing with The Woman in the Window. Although I think The Woman in the Window, that's with Fox, with Disney. I think The Woman in the Window was tracking a little bit badly. I haven't seen the movie, sight unseen, but they sold that movie over to Netflix as well. So, you know, companies like Netflix are reaping the benefits, the rewards of what's going on right now. But it will be interesting to see, you know, studios kind of maybe take the route that Universal did with Trolls World Tour and The King of Staten Island and, you know, some of their focus stuff, and be like, okay, well, maybe we really have no choice if we want this to be an awards contender, because once it hits that, you know, mid-February deadline, it's going to be really, really interesting to see what is going to be, quote unquote, an awards film. You know, will this give an opportunity to something like Kelly Reichardt's First Cow or Eliza Hittman's Never, Rarely, Sometimes, Always? You know, will movies like that actually have a chance in the conversation outside of, you know, critics groups and independent award shows? Will they be as much of a contender in, you know, major categories, you know, as something like a Mank, or Trial of the Chicago 7, which, you know, that movie is such a middle of the road kind of awards baity film that feels like, okay, like in any other year, it might get a nomination for Best Picture and be kind of like the, quote unquote, we'll throw this one a bone contender, but because of what the year is, that film is going to be celebrated more than any other, and might even sort of overlook something like One Night in Miami, which I think is a better version of kind of like the quote stage play story kind of being told of historical context in play. So it's just so fascinating. And then there's this conversation I was having with my co-host of the Untitled Movie podcast, Matt Rohrbeck, where yes, plug, where like you look at the Best Picture category. A documentary has never been nominated for Best Picture before. Animated films have been nominated for Best Picture, but documentaries haven't. And I feel like, this is cheesy and a bad pun, but maybe now is the time, and a movie like Time could be considered for Best Picture, which could be an exciting proposition, in what's going on right now.
We had to get one Eric Marchen pun in, didn't we?
Right. But it's true. Like I think that is a really interesting thing to have a conversation about, because documentaries, have their own category, but so do animated films.
Yeah.
And animated movies like Toy Story 3 and Up have been nominated for Best Picture, but documentaries have never been nominated for Best Picture. And I think the closest time a movie that came close to that was Fahrenheit 9/11, where it won the Palme d'Or, and there was a lot of talk about it, but because Bush ultimately won that election year, the film didn't make it into the Best Picture conversation. Now with the idea of 10 nominees in an Academy situation, I think that a film like Time, or one of my absolute favorite documentaries of the year, Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets, not a film that would be nominated for Best Picture, but a film that I think should be considered more than just as a documentary. I think it's some of the best direction I've seen this year from the Ross brothers.
Yeah, definitely shout out to the Ross brothers on a brilliant film. That was definitely one of my favorites of the year as well. And I mean, I think really just a way to sum this up, and I mean, especially not just from our perspectives as people in the industry, but for viewers, is that this is the year that the rules are kind of being written on the fly as you go. There's no, you're not going to have sort of the big tentpole movies necessarily, or the big must-see movies that everyone sort of has to go see or wants to go see. And it does sort of open up the avenues for people to experiment and people to sort of see other films.
Yeah, and also what are the changes that are happening now that are going to stay? I think that's also going to be very interesting to see. Like, is TIFF going to adopt a sort of a digital platform in the future that is similar to this year, where they'll have more opportunity for people at home, whether it be geo-locked or not, to see stuff via streaming? Because studios and companies were a little bit apprehensive because of piracy and what have you, but I have a feeling as well, like once we are over this, whenever that is, things will be different. And what are those changes that happen now that are going to be permanent? And what's going to be that sort of like is the theatrical release window going to be now 2 weeks instead of a month and a half? Are we going to have more of a digital kind of live in a more digital world where it comes to festivals, and even a company like will Netflix start a festival? Because they could theoretically start their own film festival with the content that they have. And then also just a competition within the streaming wars. Like, I think that that's become something of a contention with a lot of people, where it's like, well, where am I investing my money? Because I can't afford 13 of these things. I can only buy I can only afford 3 of them per month, and it'll basically become like cable again, where like it'll be package deals.
It's already there, because I mean, digital is here to stay, obviously, but premium VOD has obviously proved itself to be a player, and like you say, the streaming wars are doing nothing but heating up. And because with the amount of content that everyone from a Netflix to a Prime has, to Crave, to even smaller ones like Shudder, or even things like BritBox, or things like the Criterion Channel, there are so many different options. Or even something, if you don't want to pay for it, like Tubi, like they're still adding content constantly, and it makes for a lot of noise out there for the consumer. I mean, I was wondering, from your perspective, do you have advice for sort of the general movie going public out there on how to sort of cut through the noise?
Yeah, that's a good question. To be honest, I think you kind of have to have an idea of what you like, or at least an idea of the kinds of things you like. And, there are algorithms and what have you that are available, but, always kind of be open-minded to finding or looking for something. Like, don't just rely on other people. Like, actually, dive down a rabbit hole on iTunes and look at the editor's choice, or the independent movies that are being released on iTunes each and every week, against some of the bigger ones that are taking up a lot of the advertising space. Antebellum has this huge kind of sort of ad right now, but then you go into like the indie releases and there's plenty of stuff there. So like, always just kind of be, I think, open and ready to kind of just find something. Like, I think just stumbling on something is what is worth the research and the risk of watching something, whether it be new or something that you might like that's related to another movie that you enjoy. So I think just the idea of just being open-minded is important, and especially now where it's like there is so much content available, where like, if you read something, be like, hey, you know what, that actually kind of does sound interesting. Or if you are listening to this podcast or a podcast that you enjoy and somebody recommends something and you're kind of like, oh, that, you know what, that might be something I would want to watch. Actually watch it, like, give it a shot. And don't be afraid to watch something that is a little bit outside of the norm, because I mean, we're outside of the norm right now, and that's the perfect way to do that thing. And even just like, as like a physical media collector as well, I'm sure, like, that has changed quite a bit for both of us, just in terms of how we consume content, because both of us are avid physical media fans. But it's been a little bit less because of just mail and things like that. But it's always good to recommend movies that are getting 4K releases, or first time releases on Blu-ray, or special editions, whether they be on Criterion or Shout or Scream or Kino Lorber. Like, I always love to champion the physical media releases, because I will die on that hill. I'm going to be one of the last people standing on.
I'll be with you there, buddy.
Yeah, and I think that that's important as well, because like, if you really love a movie and you're getting a 4K release of the film, and you want to really kind of iterate to people like that are like you, that enjoy those movies, it's like, invest in it, because there are special features, there's commentary, it's a physical case, you can touch it, it's tactile. Like, it's just, there's something about that I still, even now, just love. And it kind of helps get through a week where it's like, I'll get a new release at home and I'll be like, oh, you know what, like, this is awesome. Like, my first Cow Blu-ray just came in, and I'm just so happy that this is on Blu-ray.
Yeah. And I mean, I love what you just said. And I mean, I think it's important, because if there's ever been a time to invest in movies, it's now.
Yeah.
Because it's hurt. The business is hurting. I mean, it's not going to end. Theatrical isn't dead. It's going to reform in some way, shape, or form. But there are movies out there, and there are movies that want to be seen. There are movies that need to be seen. And it's important to, like you say, dive in to like some of the independent releases on iTunes, or even something like the $4.99 bin, or just to dig around and go, oh, I've never seen that before. $5, sure, why not? That kind of thing. And I mean, or support brick and mortar retailers in Toronto that are struggling to stay open, like Bay Street Video and Suspect Video, or online retailers like Unobstructed View at unobstructedview.com. Who are offering physical media and different content for,
and cheaper too, because beforehand, Criterion, it was more expensive to import that stuff, and now it's it's still expensive, but at least it's a little bit cheaper, given you're not paying directly from the US, right? So
no, for sure. I mean, there is such a vibrant film community, not necessarily just in Toronto, but globally, that needs to be able to sort of focus on this stuff and keep it alive. And I think it will stay alive because, I mean, there's a lot of dedicated people out there who, not necessarily about, you know, physical media or anything like that, but just the art form of filmmaking alive, because it's an important thing, and it's a great sort of medium for storytelling that people tend to forget about when they can't, you know, sort of binge watch 14 episodes of something at once.
Yeah, there's no other experience like watching a movie, and I always find it hard to articulate why I love the theatrical experience so much, or why I love movies the way that I do. It's kind of, you know, for people like us, it's kind of just like it's in our DNA. We have that bug where it's like we have to watch movies. We love, you know, seeing different perspectives. We enjoy, you know, seeing the world in unique and new ways. It's just something that is so gratifying, and again, it's just so hard to articulate, because I love the idea of, you know, going into a dark room and the lights are down and, you know, a projector is on, and seeing a movie that, you know, really moves me, or, you know, makes me laugh or scares me, and maybe does all of those things. But, you know, to have that experience, you know, when we have a movie like Parasite, for example, Bong Joon-ho's film, you know, it makes the job worth it.
Yeah.
And it's always like, those are the things you're always chasing, and it's like this weird adrenaline rush, in a way. But I also still appreciate even the bad movies, because it makes you love the good stuff even more, you know?
And it really does open up a window to the human experience, which you don't always appreciate in the moment. Like, if something's happening to you personally, you don't necessarily appreciate it. But when you have that sort of separation and you can experience the emotions and the drama and sort of the complexity of characters that just are out there in the universe, like, that's the beautiful thing. And I mean, really think that's kind of the thing, especially during these times where, you know, you and I are only seeing each other on Zoom. We're not getting to really sort of interact and see each other and hello, how you doing? It's the thing that keeps us going. It's those things that sort of give us purpose and want us to sort of keep contributing to the world out there, because it's important.
Yeah, it's why I get up out of bed every morning, because I'm always thinking, like, you know, there's going to be a movie to watch
Yeah.
and a movie to write about, and to have that opportunity to talk about it in some form or another, is, you know, both gratifying and sort of a, you know, motivation that I feel is a necessity in you know, in my life, and in many of our lives when it comes to film criticism, that it really is such a powerful thing to kind of consider. And, you know, what we do is not, you know, brain surgery or rocket science and what have you, but I think that there is an
We are
importance to
very replaceable in our professions.
Oh yes, yeah, we're expendable, but not Sylvester Stallone expendable, but just expendable in general. But there is something that is important, I think, to kind of reviewing a movie. I always believe every film deserves its day in court, and
Absolutely.
that court being, you know, covered by film critics, good or bad. And you know, like, what I also love is the disagreements, because I remember, I think it was Siskel and Ebert, where they were talking about, like, it's not, you know, the movies we agree on, whether they be, you know, the great films or the bad films, it's the ones in between that are the most interesting to
Oh,
have
totally.
that conversation on, to see what the variation is.
And it's the differences that make the job interesting. I mean, I always say to people that if we all agreed on everything, the job would be painfully boring.
Oh yeah. Yeah, 100%. Like, that is the thing that I love about this job, is that not one opinion is the same. And, like, it's the same movie. We all watch the same film, but you can get something out of it that's different because of this person's perspective, or this person's, where they're coming from. And that's what I find is fascinating. Now, I love having those conversations with people. The only thing about film criticism that I'm not the biggest fan of is that I don't like when film critics sort of, have make their opinion seem like it is the fact, or that it is the be all end all kind of thing, where it's like, well, if you don't agree with me, then you're wrong. Like that's the thing I don't like. And I've seen that quite a bit in film criticism, where, you'll have a conversation with somebody and they'll attack not only your opinion, but you. And that is the thing that I'm not the biggest fan of.
No, and I mean, and that's so true across all walks of life. But I mean, I think this is a good bow to sort of, moment to end on, because it's a reminder that as much as we're all separated from one another, like we still need to keep conversations going. We still need to keep the conversation about film going, because it's vital, just culturally, and just for us, at least from our perspective personally.
Yeah, less social media, more movies. Like,
amen to that, brother.
Yeah.
But thanks for coming on today, man. I really appreciate it.
Oh, no problem. This was, as I said, a fun therapy session to kind of just.
I hope it's a fun therapy session for people listening, but we'll find out.